Hi friends, thank you for tuning in to our 2025 Halloween special. We have several submissions from your fellow viewers, so be sure to leave them some love in the comments. I thank everyone who participated, and I hope you all enjoy these spine-chilling tales. So please, sit back, grab some candy, and relax as we discuss these truly haunting stories. We started camping when our kids were little. By the time we decided to camp out near the Appalachian Trail, we were already pretty much camping pros. Because of this, we decided to go to a primitive site. This meant no water, no electricity, and far away from anyone else. It was a beautiful sight. This was in October, so the leaves were just starting to change. It took us a few hours to get everything set up. We had our tent for sleeping and then another tent that we used for cooking. After everything was good to go, we took a hike and had a really great day. When we got back, we had our dinner, and I started to feel a little uneasy. I was nervous that we were so close to the Appalachian Trail. I'd heard lots of bad stories about the trail, people disappearing, just very odd things. I worried that maybe we were a little too isolated. I mean, after all, the only thing separating us from the outside world was a thin piece of fabric. After it got dark, we all sat around the campfire for quite some time. My older son, who was 7 at the time, wanted to go to sleep, so I tucked him into his sleeping bag in the tent and came back out to sit by the fire, which was right next to it. I was holding my younger son in my lap with my back towards where the Appalachian Trail would be, while my husband sat opposite of me. We spent the evening watching the fire, just relaxing and just enjoying how quiet everything was. But as the night carried on and it grew closer to midnight, we had something unsettling happen. A stick broke from behind me, and I looked up at my husband, who was right across from me. I saw his eyes move slightly above my head, then higher and higher and higher, almost like he was looking at the top of the tree. His face went completely white, and his mouth opened slightly. I said, "What is it?" He stood up still, not saying a word. He said, "Put the kids in the car immediately." I stood up. "What is it?" I asked. He said, "Don't turn around and put the kids in the car right now. Don't ask questions." My heart started to pound. My younger son started to cry. I ran to the SUV and put him in his car seat. My husband said, "Don't look around, just get him out of the tent and put him in the car." I did what I was told. I was shaking as I was trying to strap them in, and both of the kids were crying. When I finally got them buckled in, my husband said, "Get in the car," which I did. I watched as he ran over to the tent and frantically started cutting the strings with a knife. He gathered the tent up in a ball and threw it into the back of the SUV. He got in the car and locked the doors. He then jammed the key into the ignition and turned it on full force, and slamming the accelerator down, tearing away from the campsite. I said, "What about the rest of our stuff? We're just gonna leave it here? What's going on? Why can't you just tell me?" He didn't say a word. We just drove full speed on the dirt roads. And once we finally got onto the main road, he pulled the car over and put his head on the steering wheel. I said, "What's going on? What did you see?" He just replied, "I don't want to talk about it." I again asked about all of our things. I asked him if we're just going to leave it there. And he said, "Yes, we're never coming back here again." I, of course, was frustrated that he wouldn't tell me anything. So we got home, unloaded the kids, and took out what was left of our camping gear. I asked him one more time if he would just tell me, and again, he said no. We went to bed without another word. I asked him every single day what had happened that night, and why he wouldn't tell me. We've always had really great communication, and I also want to add my husband is the most level-headed person I know. He doesn't believe in ghosts or anything of that category. So it really had to be something to bother him this much. 2 weeks after the incident, I would finally get the answer I was searching for. My husband came up and said he was finally ready to talk. That night at the campsite, my husband stated there was a creature that came out of the woods, and it started to walk right up behind me. He said it was over 10 feet tall and had a human face, but the body was an animal, and it had fur and claws. I said, "Are you sure you didn't see a bear?" He laughed and shook his head. I wish that's what it was. I'll never be able to get the image out of my head. And I'll also never talk about this again. So don't ask me anymore. And he never did. This happened almost 15 years ago. I've told some people about the story, and every once in a while I try to pry for more details, but he still refuses to speak about it. I don't know if it was a Bigfoot or something worse, but we never went back for our stuff, and we never went camping again. My children don't have any memories about this night, which I am happy for. But for me, however, I'm happy that my husband made sure that I never saw whatever was right behind me. I used to work the night shift at a small roadside motel just outside of town. I'm not going to name it for privacy reasons. It wasn't fancy, 10 rooms, flickering neon sign, and the smell of stale coffee that never really went away. Most nights were quiet. I'd sit behind the desk, scrolling my phone, waiting for someone to check in. But there's one night I'll never forget. A few years back, a guest came in around midnight. Middle-aged guy, travel bag slung over his shoulder, said he'd been driving for 10 hours straight. He paid in cash and asked for something quiet. I gave him room 104. It was at the far end of the building, away from the road, the perfect spot if you wanted peace and quiet. About an hour later, the phone at the front desk rang. It was the man from 104. He sounded uneasy and said, "Hey, is this place haunted or something?" I kinda laughed it off. Told him it was just an old building. Pipes make noise, doors creak. But he said, "No, it's not that. There's someone in the mirror." Now, I thought maybe he'd been drinking. Happens more often than you think. So I asked what he meant. He said, "I can see my reflection fine, but behind me there's a woman, standing in the corner. When I turn around, there's no one there. But in the mirror, she's still there." So, being the only one on duty at the time, I grabbed the spare key and went to check. When I got to the room, he was standing outside, white as a sheet, and refused to go back in. I stepped inside and everything looked normal. Bed made, TV off, lights on. The mirror hung above the dresser, one of those old-fashioned ones with a wooden frame. I looked into it and didn't see anything, just my reflection. Still, I felt this strange pressure in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. I told him it was fine, that maybe the lighting or the shadows had played tricks on him. But he didn't believe me. But he also didn't argue. He just said, "I'll sleep in my car." And he did. Sat in the parking lot for the rest of the night. The next morning, he checked out without another word. Later that day, my manager stopped by and I mentioned the whole thing to her. She just stared at me for a second and said, "I thought we covered that mirror." Apparently, before I was hired, something had happened in that room. A woman stayed there long-term, weeks at a time. She was quiet, kept to herself, and one night, she took her own life. The housekeepers found her the next morning, right there in front of the mirror. Management replaced the dresser but kept the mirror, just covered it with a blanket. Said it was bad luck to break one. But at some point, someone must have uncovered it. I didn't tell her I'd looked into it. I didn't tell her that when I'd stood there in the room, I noticed something strange. Something I thought was just a trick of the light. I also didn't work there much longer. Despite not experiencing anything myself, I made it a point to avoid room 104. I am from the south side of Chicago. I personally don't find these experiences frightening, but they were definitely unexplainable and help me feel that spirits are around us. To set the story, I've gone through some rough times throughout my life, as we all have. However, I lost my little brother to an overdose, and it brought me to my knees. Then a few years later, my uncle who raised me and was like a father to me ended up in the hospital due to a treatment for chronic leukemia. While there, he developed an infection. The hospital staff kept saying that he was fine, even after moving him to the ICU. The staff said he wasn't one of their sick patients and we should go home and get rest. Needless to say, we did not leave, but I did go to the waiting room to try to get some rest. I fell asleep literally with a cookie in my mouth from the vending machine. I was so tired. I don't know if I was completely asleep or in that weird between stage. Nevertheless, I dreamt of someone walking towards me. However, it was just a black silhouette in the shape of a person. Faceless, almost like a shadow. It kept walking toward me, but no matter how much it walked, the person was never right in front of me. Regardless, in my dream, I knew it was my brother, and although he didn't talk, I knew that he was telling me he was coming to take my uncle home. It woke me up and I immediately went back into the hospital room and found my uncle starting to have changes in his vital signs. The nurse said she was going to change the pulse ox because she thought he was fine, but I just knew he was dying because of that dream. He coded within a few minutes and ultimately passed away after 15 minutes of CPR. I felt somewhat at peace though because of this dream. Shortly after, my 3-year-old daughter kept saying she saw Grandpa in the room while she was playing. She would also say she had dreams about Grandpa. We asked if he had said anything, and she said, verbatim, "He was drinking Dunkin' Donuts coffee and said you were always in my heart." Growing up, it was a known thing that all you got my uncle for his birthday was Dunkin' Donuts gift cards. Because it was his one vice. He went there every day. But the fact that my 3-year-old, who would not be aware of this, said this, made us certain that she had interacted with him in some way. Shortly after, I went to a medium and he knew nothing and asked nothing about my life or the past, nor who I wanted to speak with. In fact, my sister begged to come with her husband, and the whole time her husband's family were the ones who came through, which was a little disappointing to me. But suddenly, the medium looked at me and asked if I kept thinking of a question in my head because it was very distracting. He then said, "The dead don't know the future any more than you or I," which was what I was thinking, about the future and what it would bring. He said a young man was coming through for me. He was either far away in distance or he felt far away from the family. He couldn't tell which. My brother fit both of these descriptions. He died in another state and was separated from the family based on his life choices. He stated the young man was crossing his arms over his chest, which is a sign that he is taking ownership of what happened to him in his death and to not blame myself anymore. It was crazy on point. He also said there was an older male who came through for me and wanted me to know that his passing was very peaceful and he was ready to go. Then the medium said, "You have 3 and your one in the middle is different." I shook my head no, confused, but he said, "I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about different in the way that I'm different. She can see things that others can't. She is spiritual." And my middle child was my 3-year-old, as I mentioned. He said if you foster it, she will have a gift. If you ignore it, the gift will eventually go away. My daughter, now age 15, still states that she sees visitors in her room, but never seems too scared, although it would scare the crap out of me. She also used to sleepwalk. She'd come down from her top bunk and literally stand in front of you, staring at times, or run in a circle and never remember anything. It was frightening as a parent, as I always thought she was going to hurt herself while sleepwalking. She once told me there was a lady walking down the street in a white nightgown. I was thoroughly freaked out that time. Anyways, I'm glad I got to submit this, and I hope someone finds some hope in the fact that our loved ones are still with us, even when they are gone from this world. A few summers ago, I agreed to house sit for a couple who lived a few towns over. They were older, nice people. They spent most of the summer visiting their daughter and just needed someone to feed their cat and keep the plants alive. Easy money. The house was beautiful, but old. One of those tall, narrow places with rooms that seemed just a little too long and hallways that felt just a little too dark at night. I moved in for a week with a few books, some groceries, and my laptop. The first few nights were quiet. I'd read on the couch, feed the cat, go to bed. Nothing unusual. Until Thursday. That night, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to the sound of footsteps. Not cat footsteps. Human ones. Slow, steady, crossing the hard wood floor downstairs. I froze in bed. I could hear them clearly. One step, then another, creaking floorboards. I thought maybe someone had broken in, so I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, and I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing. Then I heard the cat meow. Loud. From the hallway outside my door. I took that as a good sign, like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. And I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, however, I found something strange. One of the dining chairs had been pulled out slightly from the table. Not far, but just enough that I noticed it. And I hadn't touched it. That night, the footsteps came back. Same time, same slow rhythm. I didn't move this time. I just listened. After a minute, I heard the soft scrape of a chair leg against the floor, like someone was pulling it out again. I didn't sleep after that. The next day I called the homeowners and I asked if anything weird had ever happened in the house. The wife hesitated, then said, "Oh, you probably just heard the floor settling." But her tone didn't match her words. When they came home at the end of the week, I told them about the footsteps and the chair. The husband gave me a knowing look, like he'd heard it before. As I was leaving, the wife stopped me at the door. She said quietly, "We don't use the dining room anymore." I asked, "Why?" She looked at me, pale as paper, and said, "That's where my father passed. He used to sit there every night after everyone went to bed, just listening to the house." Then she smiled a little, a sad, tired kind of smile, and said, "He must have been happy you kept him company." My story is true and somewhat supportable, in that the disaster involved is well documented. No one but me knows what happened inside my head that day, though. But the following is factual. On September 24th, 1972, I was not quite 10 years old, and living with my family in a suburb of Sacramento. My siblings were 1 and 2 years older than me, and it was in fact my sister's birthday. She was turning 11. My dad was still active duty Air Force, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. That morning, we sat at the breakfast table and plotted our Sunday ahead. There was a special excitement in the air. We were going to an air show at the area airport, and it was going to be so much fun. We were practically giddy. And then, out of nowhere, I was hit with the knowledge that we couldn't go. No more information than that, but adamant, you and your family cannot go. Get them to agree. Basically. It was as subtle as a feather brushed across one's cheek, but with the force of a sledgehammer. And it scared me badly. I couldn't say anything in front of my siblings, as they made life miserable for me on a good day. But I took a moment alone with my mom, and she passed my message to my dad, and they believed me, or didn't want to take responsibility, I think, of disbelieving and having tragedy strike us. So, just like every other Sunday of our lives, we went to my great-grandma's, and I felt my siblings just throwing darts with their eyes all day. I just knew that they must know that it was my fault, and that I ruined my sister's birthday. I did find out about 25 years later that it wasn't true, but it was my truth for a very long time. I think my guilt began a little early, and it got all mashed up together. As we were returning to my grandma's after a trip to the store, my family and I heard breaking news on the radio. A plane trying to take off after the air show bounced down on Freeport Boulevard and then smashed into the Farrell's restaurant that was in the shopping center across the street. It was full of avgas and fully engulfed the birthday room. My parents understood how badly I needed to know the truth of what happened, and they let me stay up and watch the late news. I got my first migraine, experienced my first night of insomnia, and was home from school the next day when our uncle called from Washington State, nearly frantic to make sure we were still alive. 53 years later, I understand that I was suffering survivor's guilt, but at the time, I didn't even know there was a name, or that other people felt it too. I thought I was crazy and that I should just be happy to have saved my family. Well, I was, but I was also tormented by the question, why couldn't I have saved them too? I know that the answer is simple. I wasn't meant to. But damn, that's something no not quite 10-year-old is ready for. I was in my 20s before I realized that maybe 5 other people didn't die in our places, by the way. I had just always felt like we skipped out and let someone else be taken. Kids are weird, and it wasn't the kind of thing anyone is prepared to talk about, and certainly wasn't then in the me 70s. So it just became part of my trauma. I know this is long and probably rambling, but I can only tell the story I know, and the one I have carried all of these years. When my sister had her first baby, she and her husband moved into this little fixer-upper on the edge of town. The place was old, built sometime in the 1940s, but it had charm. Creaky floors, big windows, and a nursery that overlooked the backyard. A few weeks after the baby was born, my sister asked me to come stay over one weekend so she could get some real sleep. I didn't mind. I love my niece and I figured I could help out with night feedings. That first night, everything was quiet. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the faint static coming from the baby monitor on the nightstand next to me. You know that soft hiss sound like an old radio? I assumed it was interference. But then I heard a voice. It was low and muffled, but definitely a voice. A woman's. She said, "Shh, it's okay. Go back to sleep." My heart jumped because my sister was dead asleep in the next room. I thought maybe she'd left another monitor on somewhere in the house, but when I got up to check, the nursery monitor was the only one plugged in. I went into the baby's room. She was asleep, perfectly still. The nightlight glowed softly in the corner, and nobody else was there. I checked the closet, under the crib, even behind the curtains. Nothing. The monitor in my hand went quiet. I told myself it had to be a cross signal. Someone else in the neighborhood must have a similar monitor. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same voice. But this time it said, "Hush now, Mommy's here." I felt cold all over. My sister swore she hadn't been up. And when I asked if any of the neighbors had babies, she said no. Most of the houses nearby were empty or being renovated. We started leaving the monitor off at night after that. A few days later, my sister called me whispering. She said the baby had been staring in the corner of the nursery, smiling and cooing at nothing. When she went to pick her up, the monitor on the dresser turned itself on, even though it was unplugged. When I came over, we packed it up and threw it out without a second thought. My sister never used a baby monitor again, and my niece is now 7 years old, and they no longer live in that house. But usually around spooky season, she likes to bring this story up, and it still freaks me out. Thanks for listening. Hi everyone, thank you so much for making it this far into the video. I want to give another special thanks to everyone who took the time to send in submissions. Again, please leave them support, love in the comments because without them, this wouldn't happen. I always love doing this video because it allows me to give a chance to showcase your stories. And plus, I am just a sucker for a spooky story. I hope you all have a happy Halloween, and if you're going out, please be safe. For me, I'll be eating too much candy and snuggled up with a good scary movie. Thank you again to those who sent in their stories, and of course, to the viewers for listening. I wouldn't be here without all of you. Happy Halloween, ghouls and gals. Until next time. Bye, friends.